Our goals are to expand the scientific understanding of the Earth and the universe, create innovative new space technologies, and to extend and sustain human activities across the solar system.
An organization that dates back to 1915, called NACA, is the force behind the United States air supremacy during World War II. Years later, in 1957, the Soviet Union launches the first artificial satellite, the Sputnik 1. NACA is then absorbed into the newly formed NASA on the 1st of October 1958, with a budget of $89 million. The space race begins.
The Jet Propulsion Lab uses a Juno 1 rocket to launch the first United States satellite, the Explorer 1. 11 months later, JPL is absorbed by NASA. The Apollo program is announced. Test pilot Neil Armstrong takes his first test flight in the experimental X-15 rocket-powered aircraft. In the X-15, Neil Armstrong reaches an altitude of 39 miles, or 62 kilometers, and speeds of 3,989 miles per hour, or 6,419 kilometers per hour. A Project Mercury spacecraft takes astronaut Alan Shepard on a 15-minute suborbital flight, making him the first American in space. 1 month after the Soviet Union puts the first human in space and the first to orbit around Earth. The 5-year Project Gemini comes to an end. Missions include an endurance flight of nearly 14 days in space, overshooting the 8 days required to do a round trip to the Moon. The project also achieves sending the first onboard computer into space, the first docking of a crewed and uncrewed spacecraft, and Buzz Aldrin completes the first work-based spacewalk.
But why, some say, the Moon? Why choose this as our goal?
The first crewed mission of the Apollo program ends in disaster, with 3 astronauts losing their lives. NASA launches the first working orbiting space telescope, the OAO-2. Apollo 8 takes astronauts away from Earth's orbit for the first time and sends them on a flight around the Moon.
3, 2, 1.
Apollo 11 launches, sending a 3-person crew on their way to the Moon. 4 days later, the lunar module Eagle makes touchdown on the Moon at the Sea of Tranquility. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin step onto the Moon, while fellow astronaut Michael Collins orbits above in the Columbia spacecraft. Armstrong and Aldrin spend 21 hours and 36 minutes on the lunar surface. 4 days later, the 3 astronauts splash down in the Pacific Ocean, southwest of Hawaii. They bring back the first geological samples from another planetary body. The 22 kilograms of material includes 50 lunar rocks and lunar soil dug up from below the Moon's surface. 4 months after the first humans set foot on the Moon, NASA launches Apollo 12 with another set of astronauts that lands on the lunar surface. Apollo 13 malfunctions 2 days into their journey when an oxygen tank ruptures. They loop around and orbit the Moon before heading straight back to Earth. Apollo missions 11, 12, 14, 15, 16 and 17 all land humans on the lunar surface, resulting in 12 people setting foot on the Moon.
Memory foam begins to make its way into everyday objects, from beds to American football helmets. NASA funded the research to make the temper foam in 1966 as a way for NASA engineers to create custom seats for aircrafts. NASA's Mariner 9 spacecraft arrives on Mars after a 5.5-month journey from Earth. It is the first spacecraft to orbit another planet. Spending a year orbiting Mars, mapping and taking measurements, it sends 7,329 images back to Earth. NASA launches Skylab, the United States independently built space station. Skylab is equipped with a zero-gravity shower system, sleep compartments, toilets, solar panels, and a telescope, and is occupied by 3 crews for a total of 171 days. The Voyager 1 probe launches on a mission to study the outer solar system. As Voyager 1 continues traveling through space long after it has lost power, a gold-plated record has been placed on board for potential alien civilizations to discover. It contains scientific information, spoken greetings from world leaders, and photos and sounds of Earth. NASA's Viking 1 and 2 land safely on Mars after an 11-month journey from Earth. On Mars, the Viking landers stay in place and begin recording the surroundings. For the next 6 years, they study Mars's atmosphere and surface and search for evidence of life. 2 years after launching, Voyager 1 arrives at Jupiter. Columbia, the first spacecraft of the Space Shuttle program, launches. It becomes the first reusable crewed spacecraft and can carry a crew of 8. It is also the first spacecraft capable of carrying large satellites to and from orbit. Shock absorbers developed back in the 1960s to protect spacecrafts and launch pads during launches are now being used in buildings and bridges to absorb shocks during earthquakes. Voyager 1 takes its final image, creating the Solar System family portrait, with Earth as a distant pale blue dot. The Discovery Space Shuttle carries the Hubble Space Telescope into orbit. The telescope provides the deepest views into space and allows humans to establish the presence of black holes. NASA needs to miniaturize camera sensors for their missions while keeping scientific-grade image quality. Eric Fossum from NASA's JPL leads a team that invents the CMOS active pixel camera sensor. The new sensor, used to create the smaller and lower-powered NASA cameras, later spreads across the world, not only being used in dental cameras and for motion capture, but they also allow for cameras to be fitted into mobile phones. A natural source of omega-3 fatty acid starts to make its way into over 90% of infant formulas around the world. It was discovered in the 1980s when NASA was funding research for developing Mars life support systems, studying microalgae to see if it could be used as a source of food and oxygen. Galileo arrives at Jupiter after a 6-year journey and becomes the first spacecraft to orbit the planet. It launches the first ever probe into Jupiter, measuring the atmosphere. NASA's Pathfinder mission lands on Mars, carrying the first ever Mars rover, the Sojourner, with a mission to analyze the Martian atmosphere, climate, and geology. Ion thrusters are used for the first time on the Deep Space One probe. Thrust is generated by accelerating ions using electricity, creating a non-chemical space propulsion system.
The International Space Station begins construction in orbit. Russia launches a rocket carrying the Zarya as the first module of the ISS. The module provides storage, electrical power, propulsion, and guidance systems. 2 weeks later, NASA's Space Shuttle Endeavour takes the first American module called Unity to the ISS and attaches it to Russia's Zarya. Unity acts as a node, a connection point having 6 ports that will soon attach to other modules. Space Shuttle Discovery becomes the first shuttle to dock with the ISS. Onboard cargo includes the Space Hab module, parts for a Russian cargo crane and a US crane.
NASA's improved GPS technology that takes accuracy from 15 meters, 49 feet, down to 2 centimeters starts being used for everyday Earth navigation, pet tracking, and self-driving equipment. The first crew, 1 NASA and 2 Russian astronauts, arrives at the International Space Station to become the first people to live on board. 2 robotic geologist rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, land at different locations on Mars. NASA publishes a study of a possible Alcubierre warp drive. Equations show that it would be possible to create a warp bubble around a spacecraft, reducing travel times across the solar system from years to hours. Voyager 1 crosses the heliopause and enters interstellar space. SpaceX launches their Dragon spacecraft to deliver cargo to the ISS. Hired by NASA, it becomes the first privately developed spacecraft to dock with the International Space Station. Curiosity rover lands on Mars. During its time on Mars, Curiosity discovers evidence that there was water on the planet in the past. Mars also exhibits a seasonal variation of methane in the atmosphere, which can be a sign of underground life. Curiosity also reports that the radiation levels on Mars are dangerous for astronauts. The Rosetta space probe, built by the European Space Agency, houses a number of NASA's scientific instruments. It becomes the first spacecraft to orbit and fly alongside a comet. The European Space Agency's Philae lander that is on board the Rosetta launches and becomes the first to land on a comet. The Artemis program is announced, with the goal of landing astronauts back on the Moon and building a lunar base and economy. Voyager 1 is still communicating with Earth and is 22.8 billion kilometers, 14.1 billion miles away. It is the most distant man-made object from Earth. SpaceX launches 2 NASA astronauts, sending them to the ISS, where they stay for 62 days. The Mars 2020 mission lands on Mars, carrying on board the Perseverance rover and the first aircraft on another planet, the